PSBA is committed to diversity, inclusion, and equity work. As an organization based in Tacoma, Washington, we acknowledge the Puyallup tribe and invite you to visit the official website of the Puyallup and listen to their land acknowledgement statement. We acknowledge that we are on the traditional homelands of the Puyallup tribe. The Puyallup people have lived on and stewarded these lands since the beginning of time and continue to do so today. We recognize that this land acknowledgement is one small step towards true allyship, and we commit to uplifting the voices, experiences, and histories of the Indigenous people of this land and beyond.
Welcome to our October lunchtime conversation with artist, archivist, and educator, Sauda Mitchell. Today, I'm joined by fellow PSBA board member and great book artist, Debbie Commodore. Amanda sends her regrets. She's giving a lecture on Chinese archival history. And so we're delighted to have Debbie here. And it's great to have you facilitate with me today, Debbie, because I know that you're currently working on a project that's based on archival materials, which is something Sauda is passionate about.
Yes, thank you, Jane. I'm really excited to be joining and hearing what Sauda has to share. And that's right, I'm one of 13 artists that's currently working on a project associated with Abby Williams Hill Archives at the University of Puget Sound. So since this spring, I've been learning about her life and her contributions to Tacoma and beyond, really. So it's been a really exciting opportunity to visit the library archives and see her journals and letters and photographs in person and learn about her in this way. So I'm really interested in what Sauda has to share and hear more about her work as it relates to archival material.
Thanks, Debbie. And it's great to have Sauda here. I first became acquainted with her work from Marshall Weber of Brooklyn, and many of you that might have visited the Changing the Conversations exhibit we held last fall would have seen some of her work in the exhibit. And she's also currently on display at the Bainbridge Island Museum of Art's current exhibit. So hopefully many of you will be able to come up and see her work. Sauda has offered workshops on how consulting archives can stimulate artistic practice. And you'll be very inspired by her approaches. She's a printmaker, archivist, book artist, and educator who comes from Winston-Salem, North Carolina. She has served as the archivist and special collections librarian at Savannah College of Art and Design, one of my favorite places. It's such a great school. She's currently working towards her doctorate in educational leadership and management at Drexel University with a focus on creativity and innovation. She's also a recipient of her master's in library science from that school. And in 2013, she received her BA in Communication Art and Graphic Design from the Savannah College of Art and Design. Her work is focused on social justice, bringing voices to narratives that have been marginalized. It's my pleasure on behalf of PSBA to welcome her today. Sauda, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Jen, for that wonderful, wonderful introduction. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And I just love this platform. You know, every time I'm on Zoom, it's like, oh, not another Zoom call. But today, you know, the energy is great. And I'm just so excited to be here and really appreciative of Zoom because it's allowing all of us to gather together today and for me to just stop and for a moment and take a breath and just share my story. So thank you for having me. And I look forward to the discussion later. So when I first thought about you know, what I wanted to talk about in this this lunchtime chat. I felt a little overwhelmed because it's only 30 minutes. And, you know, I've had a really long and interesting career in both arts and archives and education. So I asked Jane what, you know, she thought everyone would want to hear about. And so she shared that it would be great to hear a little bit about my archival practice, my studio practice as an artist, and then how I'm sharing that through education. And so I thought today I would just talk a little bit about that intersection of archival activism and the book arts. And so thinking about my story, um, you know, I just want to just tell it to you from the beginning. And so this is basically where my story began. And this is the public library in East Winston, Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And this library is really special to me in my journey because not only was it a place for me to be inspired and first encounter libraries, but also there were so many other youth that had that opportunity because this library started in 1927 at a YMCA. But later on in 1953, 3 African-American physicians donated the land to the city of Winston-Salem. And so the public library had its first roots and beginnings, and has just been a really integral part of the community. And so I received my start here when I was 14 years old. I tell this story all the time when I'm in museums, and it's just a part of my origin story. But my mom basically saw that I was really close to my sister growing up, and I was basically her shadow. And so my mom thought it would be great for me to kind of grow into my own and expand my own horizons, and just kind of figure out who I was as a young woman growing up. And so she basically said, you're 14, almost 15, maybe you should volunteer. And she gave me 2 choices. And one was to volunteer as a candy striper at our local hospital, or to volunteer at the public library. And I immediately said no to the candy striper because I was not a fan of hospitals. I was afraid I was going to see blood. And so I was like, I'll take, door number 2. And so this is where it all began for me. I started volunteering at the East Winston Heritage Center. And this is where I first discovered the Dewey Decimal System. I worked in the youth department, surrounded by children's books, and I had the opportunity to learn how to organize newspapers and basically just come into my own and really just fall in love with libraries at this point. And so I wrote about my experience working at the East Winston Branch Library in the Archival Outlook, which is a publication of the Society of American Archivists. And basically what I spoke about was how during the time that I was there as a volunteer, I came in contact with all of these different images of the local high school, Atkins High School. And that was my first engagement with primary source. And so I knew that my mother attended Atkins during her time as during her educational experience in Winston-Salem. And so I ran home and I asked her, what year did you graduate? Because they had all of these different years of different classes, as you can see in the background. And so she told me. And the next day I was so excited. I went to the library and I scoured the walls and I looked for my mother's graduating class from Atkins High School, and it wasn't there. And so I went home and I told my mom, I looked for your high school graduating class and it wasn't there. And that's when she told me the story about integration in Winston-Salem and how during her senior year, her entire senior class was bussed out to another local high school in support of integration. And their class was basically known as the class that never was. And that made me a little sad, that, this entire high school class did not have representation on that wall, including my mother. And she didn't get a chance to be a part of this collection and this collective memory that, the community shares. And so in that moment, during that experience, that's when I first understood the power of archives, and not necessarily what was present in archival collections, but the magnitude of what, a silence or a gap in the collection means. So that's where I pretty much became interested in photographs and oral histories and stories, and thinking about documentation and thinking about the power of primary sources and documentation in the African American community. So later on, as I am progressing as an artist and thinking about archives, I come across, in my studies at Drexel for my library science degree, I come across, the Latin root for the word record. And basically it means core. If you break the word down to two parts, core meaning heart and dare, to give. And so when we think of recordare, or to record in the Latin root form, what we're basically doing is we're returning memories and stories, and we're giving them back to the heart and to the mind. And so that has always been an integral part of why I do what it is that I do as an artist and an archivist.
Really? Oh.
And so thinking about, continuing to think about my inspiration, and to think about, sharing how archives are so important to me, and how it's basically the foundation of my process for creating my artist books. Fast forward, I'm no longer 15. I graduated from Savannah College of Art and Design, and now I'm a mom. And, my son is going through the educational system. I'm in the beautiful Savannah, Georgia. And I'm thinking about collecting. I'm thinking about records. I'm thinking about education. At this point, I've completed an associate's degree in elementary education. And so with the challenges that I experienced with my son going through the educational system, I'm thinking about archives, but I'm also thinking about the intersection between archives and art. And so during that time, as I worked through my degree at SCAD, and also I went straight into library science school. I've continued to work in libraries. So it didn't just start, when I was 15. The entire time that I was pursuing my educational degree at SCAD, I was working in the library as a work study student. And then I transitioned to working at Georgia Southern University cataloging. And then I worked at the Georgia Historical Society as a reference assistant. And this is where, in terms of my inspiration, everything just went in, it catapulted, because I'm working as a reference assistant and I am just immersed in all of this history of not only Georgia, but Savannah. And I can distinctly remember sitting at that desk and assisting researchers walking in, wanting to learn about, the history of their historic home, or, buses lining the front of the building, the street, and students, filling all the tables, coming in and learning about primary sources. And I was always assigned to the microfiche machine, and how they thought it was just a huge computer. And, I can recall, which reference materials to pull from those stacks when researchers would come in with all types of questions. And whenever I explain what it's like to work in an archive, I sort of tell people it's kind of like Pawn Stars, where they come in and people just walk in and they just want to know something about what they would like to donate. And that was pretty much my experience. I had a lot of people coming into the archive who found papers in their attic, or business owners who bought a business property in downtown Savannah, and they found, a jar of teeth in the basement. It's like, you just never know what people would come in and ask those questions. You just never know what they would have. So it was very interesting. It was a pivotal point in my archival career. I connected at this point with other archivists who were in the local organizations, as well as Society of American Archivists. And that was crucial for me to have that support and have those resources to build and think about which direction I wanted my career to go in. And so this also was a specific time that I learned about WW Law. And So W.W. Law was a local historian and preservationist. He also was a local leader, prominent civil rights leader, and he was also the president of the local NAACP from 1950 to 1976. His full name was Wesley Wallace Law, and he passed away in 2002. So as I'm, digging into these local records at the Georgia Historical Society, I'm also learning a lot about local African-American history in Savannah. And so fast forward a little bit, I'm still working at the Georgia Historical Society, but I finished my degree in at Drexel, library science degree with a concentration in archival studies. And I'm hearing about the donation of the W.W. Law collection, and which repository was going to have, the opportunity to archive and preserve and make those records available. And I had to include this photograph because I distinctively remember that I wanted to, I just thought it was going to be an amazing opportunity. And my thought exactly was whoever had this opportunity or whomever was hired by the city of Savannah, I wanted to make sure that I was riding shotgun on that project. But here we see former Mayor Otis Johnson looking at one of the first phases of the release of some of those archival materials to the city, which was the photographic collection. And Dr. Johnson, not only did he rise to be a local citizen of Savannah, Georgia, but he also participated in a lot of the civil rights activities there, protests and things of that nature. And so he's actually seeing images of some of the events and things that he participated in with the people that he also knew that were documented in that collection. And so I was thrilled once I finished my degree at Drexel that I applied for the position to archive and process the W.W. Law collection. And I was hired. So imagine my joy. And so during the time that I was processing and the archival materials, I came across a lot of really important documents and primary sources. And Mr. Law is seen here in a march, a preacher's march, a pastor's march. He's all the way on the left side, in the left-hand corner there. And so this was a very important time for me because I'm sitting in basically the basement of City Hall where a lot of the collection materials were located, but also offsite. And I'm going through the collection and I'm finding letters and pictures and all of this history. And so the Savannah Morning News wrote a little article about it, just documenting some of the materials that I was encountering in the W.W. Law collection, but had a huge impact on, just my lens coming from, being an archivist, but also an artist and having this overwhelming sense of wanting to share the local history. And so this is where W.W. Law collected or amassed this huge collection right here in his home on Victory Street in Savannah, Georgia. And so basically, I was sifting through half a century of NAACP documents. These papers had not, no one had touched them from the time that they were arranged and packed and put together. And so I had the task of archival processing involves going through the papers, thinking about the physical arrangement of the collection, but also the intellectual arrangement so that when researchers come into the archive, they can find what it is that they might be searching for. And so during that time, I was sitting in an offsite building surrounded by albums and photographs and art and a book collection. I had this, epiphany really of, a way that I could share what it was that I was encountering in the W.W. Law collection. And at that time, it was 2016, somewhere around in there. So this is pre-pandemic, but I noticed QR codes on milk boxes and medical, packaging. And I thought, what a wonderful way if I could incorporate QR codes into my linoleum prints and digitize with permission some of the archival materials that I came in contact with in the collections that I had arranged and processed at the Georgia Historical Society, but now also in the W.W. Law collection. And that's pretty much where my artistic process started, and the idea to make archival primary sources accessible through QR code through linoleum prints, and then later that evolved into making those materials available through artist books. And so when I decided to do that, I understood, that I was disrupting a system. I was also evaluating a framework and thinking about how we encounter information and some of those roadblocks that might present themselves to some of our students coming from, lower incomes or, different situations. And I just really thought about, museum engagement as well, and some of the challenges with getting people into museums and people feeling comfortable in archival spaces. And that just basically came from my archival background and serving the public and being a professional researcher, and looking at the demographics of how many people were actually coming into the archive and felt comfortable enough to come into the archive and perform research, whether it was genealogy research or just searching for missing gaps in their own African-American history. And so I was able to connect with Erin Dunn, who is a curator at the Jepson Museum in Savannah, Georgia. And she invited me to become the next 912 artist, which is an opportunity that an artist from Savannah, Georgia, or locally could have a solo exhibition. And so it was during that time that I really had the opportunity to think about what documents I wanted to share and the story that I wanted to tell. And so I used this time to create a body of work that included artist books and also these large sales that you just saw. And I embedded QR codes into those artistic works. And from there, whenever museum patrons would come into the museum, they could scan the QR codes, and they would link them out to aggregated data or digitized archival material. And this is just one example of that. And so these sales actually linked out to an aggregated database that was compiled at Emory University. And it basically linked viewers to ship manifests, enslaved people's names that were on those manifests, and basically telling the story of the Middle Passage visually, but also with actual data and sources that you can actually see and read. And so from those linoleum prints that I first started out with, they evolved into this artist book called Finding Aid. And it's basically an artist book that has 10 different panels. Each panel has a linoleum printed on cotton fabric. And I then sewed Egyptian fibers onto the cotton. And they also include metal handles on the end. But what's also important is the color choices. There's a lot of hints of blue. And all of these things are really important and integral to the story that I'm telling. So everything, it has a meaning. I'm thinking about materiality in that, I'm telling the story of Savannah. I'm embedding these QR codes into this artist book. But I'm also thinking about how can the materials that I select, and I choose as part of bringing this story to life, what meaning can I bring to that? And so I was thinking about urban slavery in Savannah. When you visit, and walk the streets of Savannah. Everything that you touch, everything that you see, that space was occupied by enslaved people, and they were such an integral part in building the city. And so I incorporated metal, and that was significant of the ironworks that many of the enslaved people were responsible for producing in Savannah. Then also there was cotton and then indigo. So I'm mapping things back to cash crops as I'm working, and I'm telling this story of Savannah's history. And so throughout this time, I've produced Finding Aid. I produced several other artist books that are a part of this solo exhibition. And somehow, it with the help of Brooklyn, curating and placing my work into museums and libraries, I started to receive opportunities to go and exhibit and also speak about the work that I was doing. And so this is an exhibition that took place in Loveland, Colorado, where my artwork was on exhibition alongside Jacob Lawrence. 3 series of prints which was a traveling exhibition. So I was really proud of that. It was such a beautiful place, beautiful people. It was a wonderful experience, and I had an opportunity to talk about my work, but also to conduct a workshop and encourage other people to create artist books as well. And so also a part of the work that I do in thinking about activism and an archivist as an activist, this is one of the first artist books that I ever made. It's called Never Forget. And I'm basically incorporating Adinkra symbols, which I've used for many, many years in my artwork. And, some of my artist books, they include text, but some of them, there's the absence of text. And that's intentional because I really felt that in talking about, police brutality and violence against Black bodies, that, this has been something that has been ongoing for so long. I just thought that the visualization spoke for itself. So you have Sandra Bland, in these works, you have Trayvon Martin, but then I also, on the reverse side, I'm pairing, the victims of police brutality with some of our, African-American heroes and people that we, aspire and look up to and have, have a certain reverence for because of their contributions, whether it's writing or civil rights activism. And so I have Chadwick Boseman, and Toni Morrison. And so what is it that I'm saying here is that, a lot of times when we hear these stories about, young Black boys being murdered or, treated unfairly, or there's some sort of injustice in the way that they're treated by the police, automatically, their background is looked into. Have they committed any crimes? They're vilified. And so what I'm saying by placing those victims in the same spaces, in the same places with, other people is that, although, these things might have happened to them, we have to look at this whole situation in a broader sense, in a broader context, and not be so quick to judge because their lives were cut short. Who knows what they could have been? They might have been the next Chadwick Boseman, but they were never given that opportunity. And so with that, I also created another number in the Never Forget series that also included other people, George Floyd, and Emmett Till. And that was to say, how long this has been happening, this brutalization of Black bodies, just to give some people just something to think about. And so also with my artist books, I'm thinking of them as sculpture. And the beautiful thing about artist books, we can be inspired by a book in its traditional form, but an artist book can be in any format, use any materials, and it's a work of art. And so with this, I'm championing our roots and the history of the book. And so this is called Timbuktu, and it's a sculptural artist book where I'm using palm leaves. And again, thinking about materiality and fibers and seeds and pigment, and thinking about architecture in Africa, but also thinking about ways to continue to tell the story of the significance of the African culture and before civil rights, just kind of going back to some earlier times and thinking about the history of the book. And so last fall, I had an opportunity to be an artist in residence at the University of Florida as a coffee book artist. And so so much of my artwork and my artist books are research-based. And so during that time, I researched the Zora Neale Hurston collection. And so I produced an artist book called God's Battle Axe. And so it basically was my interpretation or my experience in engaging with the materials that Zora Neale Hurston used. It was basically one book where she was writing out her ideas for the environment for telling the story of Herod the Great. And so this is God's Battle Axe. I went through that collection. I took inspiration from Zora's fashion, and I crafted a box for God's Battle Axe that is enclosed in velvet, but also has an antique brooch. And I selected feathers because the box is actually almost 5 pounds, but I wanted it to seem heavy, but also light, which is how I think about Zora and her work. And just all of her contributions to anthropology and to writing. And so when I researched the Zora Neale Hurston collection and I engaged with her sketchbook, in the sketchbook, she talked about the environment for Herod the Great, and she talked about mosaics and the architecture. And so I'm bringing all of that into the artist book so that when users are engaging with that, there's a tactile sensory experience that they're having with the work. And I try to do that with all of my artist books. And of course, there's also a QR code embedded in this artist book as well. And it links out to a letter that I came across in the collection where Zora is talking about how excited she is about, telling this story, but also realizing that this is something that she's never done before and the challenges that she's experiencing in getting this manuscript published. And so I decided to select this photograph to go inside of this artist book because it's Zora. So many times when I've seen images of her in the past, of course, she's always meticulously dressed, beautiful. But in this particular photograph, she's sitting on a porch, she's smoking a cigarette, and she's just peering into the person that's taking the picture. She's peering into the camera. And this photograph really spoke to me. And so I thought it was really stunning, and I wanted to include it in the artist book. And so recently, also thinking about materiality and research and experiences, I recently spent some time at Penland School of Craft, which is located in the Blue Ridge Mountains here in North Carolina, not too far from Winston-Salem. And it was there that I decided that I wanted to take that opportunity to tell the story of Peter Oliver, who was an enslaved potter, and he lived here in Winston-Salem. And this is a shop sign that Peter Oliver would have seen every day during his lifetime because it hung above the home where he worked and was also enslaved. And so this is just a testament to my process and how I am influenced by other works of art, not only primary sources, but iconography and imagery. And so from that, I created a plate and a bowl, and I basically illustrated Peter Oliver and his wife and his children. And I brought in some of the iconography that you saw on the shop sign is also embedded in this plate. And before going to Penland School of Craft, I spent some time in the archive and I researched Peter Oliver and found copies of some of the documents associated with him. So basically, he worked as a potter and saved enough money to purchase his freedom. And this is the bill of sale, and you can see where Peter Oliver signed his name here. So to round things out, thinking about artist books as teaching tools, because now you know a little bit about what my inspiration is and how I am, a little bit about my process, how I'm using archives as inspiration to create my artist books. But there's always an opportunity to take things a little step further. And so I've had the wonderful opportunity to engage with museum patrons and groups and talk about my work. I love sharing my story. I love sharing my process. And so during this time, I also have an opportunity to talk with students, our younger students, and get them engaged with local history through my prints, and also have them actually scan the QR codes. And I just love to see people doing that, because I know that, once they scan the QR code, they're instantly going to make a connection between what they're seeing visually and what they're seeing on their phone as a primary source. In addition to talking with students and engaging with museum patrons, I also teach workshops where I encourage attendees to bring their own primary sources, things of inspiration to them, and to create their own artist book. And so during my time at the University of Florida, I taught a workshop, and it's called Making Meaning. And so I was just blown away by all of the artist books that everyone created and the stories that they were telling. So it's not just something that I feel that I can do and that I am supposed to do. I love teaching other people how to do this work as well. And also thinking about, artist books as tools and being embedded into education. University of Ohio, as part of their mission to diversify their collections, purchased 2 of my artist books last year. And so their students in the museum studies class actually selected the artist book as part of their curated exhibition for their course. And so thinking about an artist book as a teaching tool, not only if my artist book is in exhibition or someone is using it in a library, but it can also be a teaching tool and allow students to research history as they're learning how to be museum curators themselves. And so one of the stories that I really enjoyed sharing with students at Ohio University was the story of Virginia Kaya, who in Savannah, Georgia, opened up her home and called it the Museum for the Masses, and invited children in the neighborhood who might not have had a chance to go into museums. And she let them look at all of her artwork, and she had a bird in her home that, to this day, people in the community still remember their experiences with visiting her home. And so students had the opportunity to learn about her story as well as other stories through finding aid. And the really cool thing about it is, when I was at the Georgia Historical Society, some of these documents, like this bill of sale in the top left-hand corner, was one of the first pieces of, one of the first things that I had the opportunity to process and make available there while I was interning before I began working there. And so now students in a museum studies class all the way in Ohio have an opportunity to learn about her story and to see this document in the way that I did. And so at Ohio University, I had the opportunity to talk and share my work with students. And it was just a wonderful experience in hearing all of the feedback and the impact that these primary sources had with the students. And museums, as we all know, museums and galleries all over the world are contending with diversifying their collections and filling in gaps and thinking about access. And so it was so wonderful just to be in that space and talk about my artist book at the same time that this exhibition was going on, where the University of Ohio Kennedy Museum basically curated this exhibition and had on display some of their permanent collection works of art, which included work from Elizabeth Catlett and also Jacob Lawrence. And so thinking about, teaching and educating and building on, artist books as tools, educational tools. I also teach instructors and K through 12 art teachers how to use artist books and think about primary sources as a way to inspire their students to tell their stories and to decolonize their own syllabi. And so this is an image from an educators forum that I co-taught with my colleague at the Savannah College of Art and Design. And it was just a wonderful way to curate and to show K through 12 teachers and to inspire them through artist books so that they can get ideas on activities that they can pose to their students. And so there are a lot of people that I feel I look up to, and I feel like, they've been doing this so much longer than me, and I love their work as well. And so these are some of the pieces that I selected from the SCAD collection. And so you have Clarissa Sly, you have Tia Blassingame represented here. Also Kara Walker pop-up artist book. And you have other artists that I really admire, Carletta Wilson, just to name a few. They've been doing this for a very long time. And so with my students' permission, I'm also an adjunct instructor at the University of Buffalo, where I designed a class where I teach students in the library science program how to teach with primary sources. And so my assignment to my students is to locate an archive and to research that archive, look at their mission statement, look at their access statement, really look at the framework in which that Special Collections is working in, and think about a lesson plan that you would come up with or develop where you are curating and you're going into their collection, and I put them in the driver's seat. You're teaching this class, and you're trying to get your students to engage with primary sources. What would you select? Why would you select that? What is your pedagogy? What is your approach to teaching your students how about primary sources with the collection that you're managing? And so one of my students selected Barnard Archive Special Collections, and his lesson plan was based on utilizing that archive to critically engage students in one collection that is housed there, and it's the Coalition for Women Prisoners. And so I just love, teaching students, how to teach with primary sources. And I was really proud of the work that they did. And these are just some of one of the images from that collection that my student researched and developed their own lesson plan on how to teach with primary sources. And so now we've come to the end, going back kind of to the beginning. This is my son. He's not little anymore. But now I'm thinking about, in the same way that my mom shared that story with me, and it inspired me through the work that I've been doing. I have an opportunity now to share stories with him, and not only him, but my community through my artist books. So thank you so much for listening and allowing me to share some very special points in my archival and artistic career.
Sauda, this is Jane again, and I opened the remarks by saying that if people were unfamiliar with your work, they would be inspired. And I'm kind of just speechless because your work is really, really meaningful and impactful. So thank you so much for sharing how libraries and archives can be a place of inspiration, but also for bringing awareness to stories that are untold. And I know that there are probably many people on the call that feel the same way. So on behalf of PSBA, thank you so very, very much. And I want to open it up. We just have a few minutes for questions. Debbie, do you have anything you'd like to share before we move on?
Thank you. I mean, as Jane said, this was incredibly inspirational. And maybe I'll just jump in with a quick question. Because you are so inspiring. I'm wondering what advice, guidance, however you want to label it, you would give to artists who want to start working with archival materials. I mean, I know you do whole workshops on it, and so that's a big question in a short amount of time, but maybe even just practically speaking, how to begin working with libraries and other repositories of this type of primary source material.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think, it's something that something I'm really adamant about when I, am addressing my students is, if you're interested in working with archives, I really wanted to make sure that in selecting the collection that they will be working with for the duration of the quarter, that it was meaningful to them. I mean, there's so much information out there. There's so many historical societies, so many libraries, it can be overwhelming if you're just starting to learn what a primary source is or engaging with archives and thinking about ways of incorporating archives into your work. But I would just say, whatever source or materials that you're thinking of working with, make sure that it's inspirational to you, and that however you incorporate that archival material into your work, it's going to serve, the purpose of why it is that you're producing the artwork that you're working on and the artwork that you're making.
Thank you.
Sauda, this is Jane again. When I was reading about you and preparing, I found this great reviewer's quote, and I think it's just so great about thinking about your work and the power of history. And the reviewer said, looking back and returning to the past can provide a path forward, as your work so poignantly reminds us. In one way or another, we all have the agency to participate in making the world a more just place. The question I ask is, will you? And I read that, and I really thought a lot about how this concept translates to the workshops you've done with students. So perhaps it's kind of a tie in to everything you've talked about. Can you share just a bit about the reactions that you've had from younger students being exposed to archives and hopefully their excitement about artist books as we wrap up?
Absolutely. I think, one of the highlights of my career so far was working in the special collections department at SCAD. And it was during that time, not only did I have a chance to work with students one-on-one who were performing research and coming into special collections to, incorporate primary sources into their art projects, but also engaging with English as their second language students. They basically look at artist books and were inspired, and then they created their own artist book. And from that, there were so many stories about their experience just being in the United States that came out of that. And I will, it never gets old. It never gets old when you show someone a 14th century rare book and they ask, oh, can I touch it? Or, they don't even believe that it's real. And sometimes, I have to pinch myself at the things that I have had the opportunity to engage with, even at the Georgia Historical Society. There's a Civil War drum there. There's brooches with actual hair inside, or I had the opportunity to hold Benjamin Franklin's gun. So, it never gets old. You never really lose the fascination, and to see students, eyes, just light up when you show them something, that has always been a highlight.
Thank you so much, Sauda. And so many great remarks are coming in on the chat. So please take a moment to look at those. But I'm just going to end with a question to say, perhaps you need to consider a visit to the Pacific Northwest. That would be so wonderful to have you visit and workshop with us. And I thank you so, so much. It was inspiring, uplifting. And I'm going to walk down to the Bainbridge Island Museum now and look at your book again. So thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us. Our next presentation will be from Gabby Cooksey, and that will be a wonderful opportunity to learn about her incredible work with binding. But Sauda, thank you. Laurel, as always, your great work with Zoom. And Debbie, thanks for joining us today. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.